So we don't know what a dent it's put in their ability. But the more the Houthis try to respond, as indeed they are trying to, and they will try to, the more they'll reveal where they're holding things, where their storage sites are, and the easier it will be to target them. So they have to show more of what they've got. Nobody expects this strike to make it impossible for them to launch. The idea is to make it more difficult for them to launch, and then to dissuade them from trying it at all as a tactic, and to dissuade not just them, but from Tehran from backing them. To say, look, the Yemeni war is a separate problem. Iran's attitude to the rest of the world is a separate problem, to Gaza is a separate problem. We'll deal with that separately, but it is not worth your while trying to attack shipping in the Red Sea. That's the attempt. So it's a dissuasion and a degradation of Houthi facilities. That's what they're going for, in effect.
Of course, we've seen big demonstrations on the streets of the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. I mean, there's an argument the Houthis are doing this to shore up their own domestic support. They're flexing their muscles, as they have done since the beginning of this war after October the 7th, by launching, missiles occasionally at Eilat in southern Israel and so on. But what are we looking for to know that they've actually got the message? Is it just the diminution of the number of missiles they're firing at international ships?
Yes. And I mean, one of the problems here is that even if they only fire a few ships, then world shipping won't use the Red Sea. I mean, the decline in shipping has been pretty dramatic. I mean, you've been using some of the figures on Channel 4 News about this. I mean, what one is a 90% drop in shipping compared to January last year.
Which is astonishing. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. And a 2/3 drop in the number of containers going through and so on. There's no question about it that the effective closure of the Red Sea is a big problem for the world economy. And also it's a big problem for the Yemeni population, because 90% of them are dependent on food aid. And that food aid comes in, surprise, surprise, by sea. So, the Yemeni population will be closer to starvation the longer the Red Sea is closed. So there's a very strong argument for saying that we've got to do something about that. But unfortunately, the Houthis can keep world shipping away from the Red Sea simply by occasional attacks, as indeed they tried yesterday. I mean, the ship that they attacked, they thought was British related. And it was a Russian ghost ship. It was a sanctions-busting ship. I mean, personally, I wish they'd hit it. But nevertheless, the missile fell short, so there you are. But it provided the Americans with a reason to launch another Tomahawk missile from the USS Carney, which is one of the destroyers in the Red Sea, to take out another radar site. And again, I mean, that hurts the Houthis. If they lose their radars, and they've been getting a lot of surveillance from Tehran, including a ship called the Bashad, which was meant to be an ordinary Iranian ship hanging around there, but we all know it was a surveillance ship, offering information to the Houthis. I think they should have tried to target the Bashad, but it had already left. So that's gone out of the area. So the attempt is to A, make it more difficult, and B, dissuade them from trying. And you can only prevent the Houthis from firing occasional missiles by leaning on Tehran to tell them that they've got to stop. That's the only way to do it.
But it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, they will point out, as they did yesterday to me in an interview, that they've been fighting the Saudis, the Saudi coalition, for 9 years. And even Saudi Arabia, with its considerable, weaponry supplied by us and the Americans, amongst others, was not able to defeat them in Yemen. So they've become, as you know, the more you fight a war, the better you get at it. And that's what they've done.
For sure. I mean, the Houthis they're not just a mere guerrilla group. I mean, they're terrorists in what they do, and they fight in a guerrilla way, but they've got hold of, some pretty powerful weapons from the government that they deposed from Sana'a. So they've got armored vehicles, various trucks and transport. They've got missiles. They've got some aircraft. They've got they haven't got much of a navy, but they've got boats. They've got offshore craft, which the Iranians give them. And their elite forces are trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They go to the academy in cohorts, and they're officially trained by Iran. So they've got all of that. The point is that Western action is not designed to defeat the Houthis militarily. The Houthis will be whatever they're going to be, and they will do whatever they're going to do in the Yemeni war. It is designed to dissuade them from this particular campaign to block the Red Sea.
Right, but as you say, all it takes is a little missile here and there to dissuade these big shipping giants like Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd from using, this
Correct.
crucial shipping lane. That's all it
Correct.
takes.
And the boss of Maersk said only a couple of days ago, he said that even if this crisis comes to an end this week, it will take some time before the Red Sea is restored to normality. So we're already going to suffer. The world economy, the Yemeni people will already suffer, even if this action by the West on Thursday night was completely successful, which of course it won't be.
And as I said at the beginning of the show, every action has a reaction. And, you could say that if this creates inflationary pressures, especially in America, this could be the one of the other things that leads to Joe Biden's defeat at the ballot box. I know, it's 11 months away from now, but these are the calculations that are being made in Washington.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It doesn't help. There's all sorts of stuff out there on social media and Twitter. This is all American conspiracy to take it all. And I always say to people, look, Joe Biden needs this like a hole in the head.
Yeah.
He needs the Gaza crisis like a hole in the head. All of this makes everybody's life much, much more difficult. And so there's no conspiracy involved in this. But you're right. Military action is always fraught with unintended consequences. But remember also, I make this point, that sometimes the costs of inaction are much, much greater.
Sure.
And in this case, the idea of that we just close up the Red Sea and let the Houthis hold the world to ransom for the next 2 years, it's impossible. That would be worse than anything that's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 months.
Let's finally end on the really big question that's lurking behind all this: is what does Iran do? Because we on one level, there's a sort of what they call the axis of resistance led by Iran. You've got Hezbollah that is supplied and trained by them and funded by them to a large extent in southern Lebanon. You've got Hamas and you've got the Houthis. But we also know that the Iranian regime is terrified of its own people who are desperate to get rid of it. So what's their game in all this, do you think?
Yeah, the game, it's literally a game of brinkmanship. The calculation among the Western powers, certainly the United States, is that the Iranians do not want and would not win a more general regional war across the Middle East. They absolutely don't want that. But on the other hand, they can't resist dabbling in the chaos produced by the Gaza crisis because it gives them lots of opportunities and they can't resist taking those opportunities. And so what the Americans are doing, particularly in this particular Red Sea crisis, is drawing a red line. Of course, red lines have got a pretty bad reputation in recent years after Obama's red line in 2015, which he allowed to be crossed and didn't do anything, et cetera, et cetera. Joe Biden is going to stick with this red line. I can promise you. I'm virtually certain of it. And the idea is to draw a red line to, in a sense, to call the bluff of Tehran, to say, we know that you cannot sustain a war. We know that internally you can't sustain a war. You'd be frightened of a war yourself, whether you win or lose on the battlefield, as it were. You do not want a bigger general regional war. So if you're going to play brinkmanship on bits of this crisis, then we will stand up to you. And in a way, yes, it's dangerous, but the consequences of letting Tehran just play games around the whole crisis is probably worse.